Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Honored, pleasured, grateful to be with you. Hello for the closing of Sign of the Beaver. I am here in the Monte La Salle, central Utah. I am by a nearby stream and by a beaver den. Probably, you might want to call it a beaver dam, but it's definitely a beaver den. And I figured this would be a beautiful place to start the end of our book. Ladies and gentlemen, The Sign of the Beaver has been a wonderful adventure. It has been one that I have been able to read throughout a natural experience, which I think is absolutely wonderful. My heart is open. The last time we were with Etienne and Matt, Etienne had been a little nervous about going off because he had learned that it is time for him to go find his Manitou, and that was going to take some risk, to be out in the forest alone, to be without food, and that it was a great rite of passage. And Etienne was pretty shooken up about it. So at the end of chapter 20, I am left wondering, is Etienne going to find his Manitou? What is that going to do to Matt and Etienne's relationship? My question has been, again, 7 sticks with 7 notches in it for Matt has come and gone a long time prior to this. Mom, Dad, family's supposed to be here together, and right now, they're not. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin the end of Sign of the Beaver with you. I want this wonderful spot to be where we close this story. I want you to pull out your verbal to visual notes or your notebook. If you want to sketch and draw, we are on chapter 21. The very last thing we heard was the fact that Matt was a little nervous for Etienne, and that Etienne was a little nervous for himself. The weather is changing. The plants are starting to prepare for winter, and Matt should as well. Chapter 21 begins with these words. Then one morning, Etienne returned. Thank goodness we didn't have to wait very long. Matt had been waiting, watching the forest trail impatiently, unwilling to go far from the cabin, lest he miss the boys coming. But when finally he saw Etienne approaching, his heart sank. Etienne was not alone. His grandfather stalked by his side. Matt sensed that this meant trouble. Perhaps Saknus had come to reproach him. He would surely know that the 2 boys had been neglecting these lessons. Dreading to face the old man, Matt walked out to meet them, courteously giving the greeting that he had learned. Saknus returned his greeting with dignity. He did not smile. His solemn face made Matt's heart sink still lower. Then, startled, Matt turned toward Etienne. He did not dare to ask a question, but he saw at once that there was no need to ask. No doubt about it, Etienne had found his Manitou. Oh, as my reading brain digs in, I want to know what has changed. How does Matt know without a single word from Etienne? This means he's inferring something, right? Something is showing Matt that Etienne has changed. He had changed. He stood straighter and taller. He looked older, and Matt suddenly realized why. The black hair, which had always hung straight down almost to his shoulders, was shaved away. His scalp, like his grandfather's, was bare, except for a single patch running back from his forehead and braided into a top knot, fastened with a red string. Like the fresh bear grease that glistened on Etienne's skin, pride glistened all over his face. Moreover, he carried a gleaming new rifle. "You've got a gun," Matt cried, politeness forgotten. "My grandfather traded many beaver skin," Etienne answered. Though he, in these last days, had become a man, he had not learned altogether to hide his feelings. Interesting. Did you hear that? The author just said that though Etienne had become a man in these last few days, he had not learned altogether to hide his feelings. As a reader, I'm listening to that and saying, what is Elizabeth George Spear trying to tell me? As a man, as I get older into manhood, am I supposed to hide my feelings? Now, I might not want to stand in the middle of a grocery store and stomp my feet because I don't get any gum. But the fact is that I do understand that there are some pieces that as I get older, I don't respond the same way I did as a boy. But I want to be really careful about the idea that I want to take away from this moment that Elizabeth George Spear is trying to tell me that I am, as a man, supposed to hide my feelings. Guys, men, women, learn how to talk about your feelings. Learn how to share, okay? He waited now for Etienne's grandfather to speak. The old man's face was grave, but he did not ask about the lessons. Time of sun gets shorter, he said. Like footsteps of bird, soon ice on water. I know it's October, Matt said. Maybe even November. He had not wanted to even start looking at his sticks these last few weeks. All Indian, go north now, Sackness continued. We all hunt moose. All Indian go. Etienne not come more to learn white man's signs. Matt couldn't answer. White father not come. Sackness went on. Matt spoke quickly. He ought to be here any day now. Sackness looked at him soberly. Maybe him not come, he said quietly. Anger flared up in Matt. He could not allow this man to speak the fear that he had never dared to admit to himself. Of course he'll come, he said, too loudly. He might even come today, later, this afternoon. Snow comes soon, Sackness persisted. Not good, white boy, stay here all alone. White boy, come with Indian. Matt stared at him. Did he mean to go on the hunt with them? Was he being invited? The most important hunt of the year, Matt was being asked to come? Sackness smiled for the first time. Sackness teach white boy hunt moose like Etienne. White boy and Etienne be like brother. A sudden joyful hope sprang into Matt's mind. He realized at this moment just how anxious Matt had been. This was a way out. He did not have to stay here alone through the long winter. Then, as swiftly as it had shown up, this new hope died away. In spite of his longing, in spite of being afraid, he knew what he must do. Thank you, he said. I'd like to go on the hunt. I'd like to learn from you, but I can't do that. If, when my father comes, he wouldn't know where I had gone. Leave white man's writing for him. Matt swallowed hard. Something might happen to the cabin. He's trusting me to be here when he returns. Maybe him not come, Sackness said again, not smiling now. He'll be here soon, Matt insisted. He was ashamed that his voice broke in the middle of the word. If he couldn't come, he'd send someone to tell me. He'd find some way, no matter what happened. You don't know my pa. Sackness was silent for some time. White boy, good son, he said at last. But better you come. Sackness glad for white boys be Nequenis. Did you hear that? Sackness just said it would be better for him to come because it's so dangerous in these winter woods. And he said that you would become my Nequenis, that you would be adopted by his tribe. Matt could only keep, wow, that was amazing to me. Matt could only keep shaking his head. The man's words had brought a great lump into his throat. Thank you, he managed. You've been so good to me, but I must stay. Without another word, Sackness held out his hand. Matt put his own hand into the bony grasp. The two Indians turned and walked away without another word. Etienne had not even said goodbye. There would be no lesson that morning, no story, no tramping in the forest or fishing. Not this morning, not ever. Close to panic, Matt wanted to run after them. He wanted to tell that he had changed his mind, that he would go with them anywhere rather than stay here alone with winter coming on. But he set his jaw tight and stood where he was. Gosh, that almost so stubborn to me. After a few minutes, he reached for his axe and fell to splitting logs with a fury. He couldn't keep from thinking, however, was he just being foolish and stubborn? Wasn't going with them the wisest and smartest thing that he could have done? Wouldn't his father have understood? He remembered hearing that many white men, and white women too, who had been captured by the Indians had lived many years in the wilderness, did never want to return to the white man's world when they had a chance, but instead had chosen to live with the Indians. He had never understood that, but now he could see very well how it might happen. He no longer distrusted Native Americans. He knew that Etienne and his grandfather would be kind, and that even grandmother would make him welcome, and that over time they would share with him whatever they had, no matter how little. He had found friendship and goodwill in their cabin. He had envied Etienne and his free, unhampered life in the forest. And the boisterous comradeship in the village. If he had been taken captive as a child and raised as an Indian boy, how would he himself have chosen? It wouldn't be the same to make that choice deliberately, though. He was proud that they had wanted him to live with them, but he knew that they could never really be, that he could never really be proud, as Etienne was proud of being a hunter. He belonged to his people. He was bound to his own family, as Etienne was bound to his grandfather. The thought that he might never see his mother again was sharper than hunger or loneliness. This was the land his father had cleared to make a home for the whole family. It was his own land, too. He couldn't run away from it. He was troubled that Etienne had walked away without a word of farewell. Had he been offended? Had he really wanted Matt to go with them? To be a brother of his? Or was he only obeying his grandfather as he had to do about the lessons? It was so hard to tell what Etienne was thinking. Etienne had become a hunter. He had a gun. He would not have time now to wander through the forest or to listen to stories. He would not have to bother any longer with a white boy who would never really be a mighty hunter like him. But surely Etienne could have held out his hand, as his grandfather had done. Chapter 22. Every morning, in spite of himself, Matt kept an eye out for Etienne. When 4 days had gone by, he decided that there was little chance that he would ever see his friend again. Doubtless, the Indians had already left the village and were on their way north. So when he saw Etienne coming through the woods with his dog at his heels, he ran across the clearing to meet him, not bothering to hide his relief and his pleasure. "You think different?" Etienne asked quietly. "You go with us now." Matt's eagerness died away. "No," he said unhappily. "Please try to understand, Etienne. I must wait for my father here." Etienne nodded. "I understand," he said. "My grandfather understood too. I do same for my father, if he's still alive." The two boys stood looking at each other. There was no amusement and no scorn from Etienne's eyes. How very strange, Matt thought. After all the brave deeds he had dreamed of to win the boy's respect. How very strange, Matt thought. After all the brave deeds he had dreamed to win this boy's respect, he had gained it at last just by doing nothing, just by staying here and refusing to leave. "My grandfather send you gift," Etienne said now. He unstrapped from his back a pair of snowshoes. They were new, the wood smooth and polished, the netting of deer hide woven in a neat design. Before Matt could find words, Etienne went on. "My grandfather send you gift," he said. He took from his pouch a small birch basket of maple sugar. Late in the season like this, Matt knew sugar was scarce and dear to the Indians. Pause. Matt, remember at the very beginning, loved his molasses. Matt, at the very beginning, the whole reason why all this started was going up and seeing the bee hive and then getting stung so many times that Sackness and Etienne had to save him. Now he's getting a little thing of maple sugar, which would have been created by the sugar maple trees up in the area of Maine and New Hampshire. "Thank you," he said. "Tell your grandma." "My grandmother send gift," he said. Took from his pouch a small birch basket of maple sugar. So the grandmother sent that sweetness. "Thank you," Matt said. "Tell your grandmother that when you come back, I'll help gather more sap for her." Etienne was silent. "Not come back," he said. "In the spring, I mean. When the hunt is over," Matt replied. "Not come back," Etienne repeated. "Not live in village ever again. Our people find new hunting ground. But this is your home. My people hunters. My grandfather say many white people are coming. Cut down trees, make house, plant corn. Where my people hunt." What could Matt answer to this? He had only one argument to offer. "Your grandfather wants you to learn to read," he reminded Etienne. "I haven't been much of a teacher, but when my family comes, it will be different. My mother will teach you to read, and she'll teach you to write." "What I read for? My grandfather mighty hunter, my father mighty hunter. They not read." "Your grandfather wants you to be able to understand treaties," Matt insisted. We go far, far away. No more white man. No need to sign paper. An uncomfortable doubt had long been troubling Matt. Now, before Etienne went away, he had to know. This land, he said slowly, this place where my father built his cabin, did it belong to your grandfather? Did he own it once? How man own ground? Etienne questioned. Well, my father owns it now. He bought it. I not understand, Etienne scowled. How can man own land? Land same as air. Land for all people to live on. For beaver and deer. Does deer own land? How could you explain, Matt wondered, to someone who did not want to understand? Somewhere in the back of his mind, there was a sudden suspicion that Etienne was making sense, and he was not. It was better not to talk about it. Instead, he asked, where will you go? My grandfather say much forest where sun go down. Sun go down, in the west. My grandfather say much forest where sun go down. White man not come so far. To the west. Matt had heard his father talk about the west. There was good land there for the taking. Some of their neighbors in Quincy had chosen to go west instead of buying land up north in Maine. How could he tell Etienne that there would be white men there too? Still, they said that there was no end of land in the west. He reckoned there must be enough for both white men and Indians. Before he could think what to say, Etienne spoke again. I give you gift. Dog like you. I tell, stay with you. You mean you're not taking your dog with you? No good for hunt, Etienne said. Walk slow now. Good for stay here with Medabe, with white brother. Medabe. M-E-D-A-B-E. Medabe. White brother. Etienne just called Matt a brother. Do you remember way back when we were reading and we were hoping that Matt would just gain the respect of Etienne? Medabe. He's been waiting for that word forever. And also the dog's gonna stay with him. Etienne's careless words did not deceive Matt. He knew very well how much Etienne felt for that dog, for that no-good dog that followed him everywhere and he went. And Etienne had said, white brother. Yes. Do you see how that works? As a reader, I heard it before the book told me. I love that. I heard Medabe as white brother, and I inferred that Etienne is calling him white brother. And then the book handed it to me just in case I missed it. Elizabeth George Spear wanted me to hear that. And Etienne had said white brother. Matt could not find the words that he needed, but he knew that there was something he must do. He had to have a gift for Etienne, and he had nothing to give, nothing at all that belonged to him. Robinson Crusoe? What could that mean to a boy who would never learn to read it? He did have one thing. What is it? He did have one thing. At the thought of it, something twisted tight in his stomach. But it was the only thing that he had that could possibly match the gifts that Etienne had given him. Wait here, he told Etienne. Are you wondering? I'm wondering. He went into the cabin and took down the tin box. The watch was ticking away inside it. He had never forgotten to wind it. Even when he was too tired to notch a stick, now he lifted it out and held it in his hand, the way that he had held it when his father had given it to him, as though it were a fragile bird's egg. His father would never understand. Before he could think about another minute, Matt hurried back to where Etienne stood waiting. I have a gift for you, he said. It tells the time of day. I'll show you how to wind it. Etienne held the watch even more carefully. There was no mistaking that he was pleased and impressed. Probably, Matt thought, Etienne would never learn to use it. The sun and the shadows of the trees told him all he needed to know about the time of day. But Etienne knew that Matt's gift was important from him. Fine gift, Etienne said. He put the watch very gently into his pouch. Then he held out his hand. Awkwardly, the two boys shook. Your father comes soon, Etienne said. I hope you get the biggest moose in Maine, Matt answered. Etienne turned and walked into the woods. The dog sprang up and followed him out. Etienne motioned him back and uttered one stern order. Puzzled, the dog sank, put his chin between his paws, As Etienne walked away, the dog whined softly, but he obeyed. Matt knelt down and put his hand on the dog's head. He's not alone. Chapter 23. Hold on. The brothers have just said goodbye to each other. That's a significant moment in this story. Remember how they didn't belong to each other. Remember the struggle to belong to each other. It's beautiful. Chapter 23. Matt filled his days with work. He made the cabin trim. Where the clay had dried and crumbled away between the logs, he brought new mud, strengthened it with pebbles, and packed the spaces tightly. On the insides, he chinked every tiny crack to make the room snug. The pile of logs stacked against the cabin wall grew steadily higher. His meager harvest was safely stored away. The corn, the little he had managed to save from the deer and the crows, had all been shucked. Sitting by the fire after his supper, he scraped the dried kernels from the cobs, remembering the many long evenings at home when he and his sister Sarah had been set to do the work with the corn scraper. Sarah would laugh now to see him rubbing away with an old clamshell like an Indian. Some of the ears of corn he had hung against the wall by the twisted husks, as he had seen his mother do. She had said once that they were like scraps of sunshine in the dark days of winter. Overhead, he hung strips of pumpkin on ropes of vines strung from wall to wall. They would be ready for his mother to make into pies. In a corner leaned the old flour sack, overflowing with the nuts that he had gathered, hickory and butternut, and even the acorns that he had once thought proper food only for squirrels. On the shelf ranged birch baskets filled with dried berries and the wild cranberries he had discovered shining like jewels along the boggy shores of the pond. They were puckery to the tongue, but when his mother came, she would bring sugar, and the stewed cranberries would make a fine treat with her bread of white flour. Matt forced himself to eat sparingly of these things. The corn he regarded as a sort of trust. His father planted it and would be counting on it to feed the family through the winter, and some must be saved for the spring planting. Proud though he was of his harvest, Matt knew in his heart that it was far from enough. The hunt for food would be never-ending this year. Hour after hour, with his bow, Matt tramped through the forest, the dog beside him. There was not much game to hunt these days. More often than not, his snares were empty. Soon the animals would be buried deep in burrows. Twice he had glimpsed a caribou moving through the trees, but he had little hope of bringing down any large animal with his light arrows. Once in a long while, he succeeded in shooting a duck or a muskrat. The squirrels were too quick for him. Although the dog was certainly not much of a hunter, he did occasionally track down some small creature. But he also had to eat his share, sometimes more than his share, because Matt could not resist those beseeching eyes. Truth to tell, they were both hungry much of the time, the dog and Matt. Luckily, they would not starve with the pond and the creeks teeming with fish. Matt knew that for many months of the year, fish filled the Indian cookpots. Luckily, too, fish were easy to catch, though Matt had to be continually twisting and splicing new lines from vines and spruce roots. Mornings now, he had to shatter a skim of ice on the pond. Soon he would have to cut holes with his axe and let his lines down deep. He shivered to think of it. It was the cold that bothered him the most. His homespun jacket was still sound, since he had little use for it in the warm weather, but his breeches were threadbare. One knee showed naked through a gaping hole, and the frayed legs stopped a good 5 inches above his ankles. His linen shirt was thin as a page of his father's Bible, and so small for him that it threatened to split every time he moved. Even inside the cabin, he was scarcely warm enough. The moment he ventured outside, his teeth chattered. He thought enviously of the Indian's deerskin leggings, but a deer was far beyond his prowess as a hunter. There were 2 blankets on his pine bed, his father's own and his own. Why couldn't one of them cover him in the daytime as well as in the night? He spread a blanket out on the floor and hacked it with his axe and his knife. Using his worn-out breeches as a pattern, from the leftover scraps, he carefully pulled threads and twisted them together. He had seen the Indian women doing this with bone needles, and he searched about outside the cabin until he found some thin, hard bits of bone that had been left from an old food meal. These he shaved down with his knife. He ruined 3 bits trying to poke a hole through the bone, before he thought to try a thin slit instead of a hole to hold the thread. Finally, he managed to sew his woolen pieces together. He thrust his legs into the shapeless breeches and gathered the top about his waist with a bit of rope. He was mighty pleased with himself. He was going to be forever hauling them up, and he was sure to trip, and they were sure to trip him if he had to run. But at least he could kneel on the ice and pull in his lines. From 2 rabbit skins, he made some mittens without thumbs. He had no stockings, and his moose hide moccasins were starting to wear thin. He decided he could stuff them with scraps of blanket or even with duck feathers to keep them warm. He remembered that once, in a downpour, Etienne had shown him how to line his moccasins with dried moss to soak up some of the rain. Perhaps moss could soak up the cold as well, and there was plenty of moss around. His most satisfying achievement was his fur hat. For this he knew he must have more fur. In the woods, Etienne had once pointed out to him a deadfall, constructed of heavy logs so intricately balanced that they would fall with deadly accuracy on an animal that attempted to steal the bait inside. Beaver and otter were caught in such traps. Etienne explained sometimes even bear. Now Matt determined to make one for himself. Perhaps a small one. It would take a very large log even to stun a strong animal, and he had no wish to come upon a wounded bear. Much as he would like a bear skin, he would try for smaller animals. He felled and trimmed 2 good-sized trees, setting the logs on lighter posts with a feat of delicate balance that took him hours of patient trial and error. Over and over, they crashed down, threatening his toes and fingers. He felled and trimmed 2 good-sized trees. Setting the logs in lighter posts on was a feat of delicate balance that took him hours of patient trial and error. Over and over, they crashed down, threatening his toes and fingers. Finally, they held to his satisfaction, and gingerly he slipped 3 fish inside the trap. To his astonishment, on the 3rd morning, he found an animal lying under the fallen logs, so nearly dead that it was no task to club it to death. Wow, that's a connection, isn't it? To where the red fern grows, the clubbing. Why didn't they tell us what kind of animal it was? Maybe they will. It was, so nearly dead that it was no task to club it. It was smaller than the otters he had seen playing along the banks. A fisher, perhaps. Fisher. I might want to look that one up, but I don't have any internet connection way out here. Maybe you can do that. That night, he and the dog feasted on crackling bits of roasted meat. It was strong flavored, and he knew the Indians did not care to eat it, but he could not be so choosy. Other strips he hung over the fire to smoke. There was also a scant amount of yellow fat. Used sparingly, a spoonful of that fat would make his usual fish diet taste like a banquet. The real treasure was the pelt, heavy and lustrous. He worked on it slowly, as he had watched the Indian women work. With a sharp-edged stone, he scraped away every trace of fat and flesh from the skin, washed it in the creek, and for days, in his spare hours, rubbed and stretched it to make it soft and pliable. Then he set to work with his bone needle. He was enormously proud of the cap that he fashioned. Sackness himself would have envied it. Most of his work he had done by firelight. He longed for candles. He ate his supper by light of split pine branches set in a crack in the chimney. They gave light aplenty, but they smoked and dripped sticky pitch, and he was always afraid he might drop off to sleep and wake up to find the log chimney afire. At any rate, after a day of chopping and tramping, he was so tired to go to bed with the dark. So often as he did the squaw work that Etienne would have despised, thoughts of his mother filled his head. He imagined her moving about the cabin, humming her little tunes as she beat up a batch of cornbread, shaking out the board cloth at the door, for of course she would not let them eat at a bare table. He could see her sitting by the firelight in the evening, her knitting needles clicking as she made a woolen sock for him. Sometimes he could almost hear the sound of her voice, and when he shut his eyes, he could see her special smile. He tried to think of ways to please his mother. She would need new dishes for the good meals that she would cook. He whittled out 4 wooden trenchers and 4 clean new bowls, rubbing them smooth with sand from the creek. He made a little brush to clean them with from a birch sapling, carefully splitting the ends into thin fibers. In the same way, he made a sturdy birch broom to sweep the floor. Then he set a more difficult task, a cradle for the baby. With only an axe and his knife, the work took all his patience. Gosh, I forgot about the baby. His first attempts were fit for only kindling, but when the cradle was done, he was proud of it. It was clumsy, perhaps, but it rocked without bumping, and there wasn't a splinter anywhere to harm a baby's skin. Sitting by the fire, it seemed a promise that soon his family would be there. When he had a few more rabbit skins, he would make soft coverlet for the baby. For Sarah, he made a corn husk doll with corn silk hair. He was surprised at how much he looked forward to Sarah's coming. Back at home, she had been nothing but a pesky child, always following him about and pestering him to be taken along wherever he was going. Now he remembered the way that she had run to meet him when he came home from school, pigtails flying, eyes shining, demanding to know everything that had happened there. Sarah hated fiercely being a girl and having no school to go to. She would be full of curiosity in the forest. She wasn't afraid like most girls. She was spunky enough to try almost anything. She was like that Indian girl, Atien's sister. What a pity they couldn't have known each other. Man, I gotta stop. I gotta stop, and I'm sorry, this is a little selfish of me. I'm gonna pause. I love what we've read today. We've read some amazing chapters, 21, 22, and 23. They were longer than I thought, and I thought it was gonna go smoother because there was just a few more pages left. But I'm gonna pause because I want you to hold on to this moment. I want you to imagine being out a long, long, long way, and your father or your mother or some important family member looks at you, or maybe even a teacher looks at you and says, "You can do this." And everything in your heart says, I don't think I can. I don't know if I can. And then that person walks away from you and you are left alone. And at first you're clumsy, you're trying to figure something out and it's not easy. And then you make a really bad mistake, but fortunately somebody other than your family is right there to look out for you. Somebody that you didn't even expect. Somebody that you might have already heard some pretty bad things about. And then they end up helping you. Not only do they end up helping you, you end up helping them. You end up helping them so much that they invite you back to a sacred space. You make a brand new friend. You do so much for them. And you do so much with them. And you learn so much that winter is coming and your family isn't here yet. And they say, you should come with us. And you have this sinking feeling that if you don't, you're missing out, but it's getting colder. And life is hard out in the middle of the woods, right? But Matt stays. Atien, his native brother, his family, leaves him his Piswat, right? His, wait, what was the dog? I can't remember. What's the dog's name? I can't remember. I just remember Piswat, good for naught. Aramis, dog. And you're left alone. And you're out here. I mean, just try to make a life for yourself out here. Just try. I wouldn't know the first thing to start with. Thank goodness I'm reading this book. I'd have some sort of idea. But as soon as the natives said, you come back with us and you start living with us, I'd probably jump on that train, right? Even though metaphorically it's just a train. But he doesn't. He sits. And now he has time to think. He has time to make things. He's now made food dishes out of wood. He has made his sister a corn husk doll. Even though he realizes as he's making this corn husk doll that he actually misses things about her that he was taking for granted. Probably kind of like some of you, maybe being left without school and having that moment of feeling a little homesick, maybe a little missing. And then he just waits. He's got food hanging. He knows how to hunt. He can fish. He's just trying all these things that he learned from the native peoples. There's so many things. Are there other ideas that you have in your head about what this story has just given us in 3 chapters? So much to grab onto. And I'm tired. And my eyes are tired. And I'm going to take a break now, 34 minutes. So I'm going to leave you here. We have 2 chapters left, chapter 24, chapter 25. I'm going to be in a big city tomorrow, and I'm going to be able to pass these on soon. I'm going to finish that story in a big city, and I think it's an interesting place to end. But I want to say goodbye to the deer or the beaver den. I don't know if there were other animals that snuck by. I'm going to have to watch because this is so beautiful out here. It's a perfect place to be reading about the native worlds. Last thing that sticks in my head before I go, sorry, this is what happens when you're hanging out with me, is Atian and family think that they are no longer going to be in this land. They are going to go west, and they're going to find other lands to live. Now, think about looking at the North American continent and all the states of America. Do you find a whole lot of places where there aren't very many white people? And not just white people now. We're talking Americans. We're talking about Canadians. We're talking about Mexican people. We're talking about people of African descent, of island descent, of northern descent, of southern descent. But there isn't much land left. And so there's a lot of land, but it's quote unquote owned. And I want to go back and just leave you with that thought about how Atian said, land is like air. Do deer own land? All those ideas are important to us as we move forward from here. And what does it mean for us? What did it mean to Matt? Beyond that, I'm going to go out and be adventurous. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I can't thank you enough for being with us today. We could have done this without you, but we didn't. We didn't have to. And so thank you for being here. It means the world to us. I look forward to finishing the story with you soon, and I look forward to what book we read next and what other adventures we can come across. Send me some more love. Let me know the kinds of things that you're discovering. Share your ideas and your verbal to visuals, and have a great, wonderful day. Go out and find something amazing. Find that question, and then keep looking until you understand and find the answer too. I love you. Now get out of here.